Have you ever thought that love, real unconditional love, could be measured, weighed, or assigned a price tag? My name is Evelyn Walker, and for most of my life, I believed there were things that money simply couldn't touch. Like a warm hug on a tired afternoon, or the feeling of being needed by someone you love. But sometimes the people we hold closest are the very ones who surprise us the most. Sometimes love isn't lost all at once, but slips quietly through small cracks until the day you wake up and realize something precious is missing. That moment came for me on a rainy Thursday, when my son, Brian, my only child, slid a white envelope across our kitchen table. We'd always used that table for family dinners, birthday cakes, homework assignments, and late-night talks. This time, there was no celebration, no laughter, only a quiet sort of tension in the air. I opened the envelope expecting maybe a note or a bill for groceries, but what I found instead knocked the breath from my chest, a neatly printed invoice. $750 per month, it read. Due on the 1st? Late fee after 5 days? It might as well have been a letter from a stranger. It's hard to describe the feeling that comes when you realize the place you called home has suddenly turned into something else, a transaction, a business arrangement. My hands trembled as I tried to process the words. For years, I had lived in their basement, helped raise my grandsons. Eli and Max cooked meals, folded endless piles of laundry, and kept the house running so Brian and Samantha could work. No one ever asked me to do it. I simply wanted to help. Isn't that what family is for? But on that gray afternoon, I saw myself not as a mother, but as a tenant. No questions, no thank yous, just a price where love used to be. Maybe you felt something similar, a moment where you give everything only to be told it's not enough. If you have, I want you to know you're not alone. This isn't just my story. It's for anyone who's ever wondered where their place is or who they are when the world seems to move on without them. As I sat at the table, invoice in hand, I felt an ache I hadn't known in years. I remembered birthdays spent blowing out candles, holidays wrapped in laughter, late nights waiting for Brian to come home safe from college parties. How quickly those memories faded into the cold light of a single sheet of paper. Still, even as I blinked away tears, a small voice inside reminded me this isn't where your story ends. Maybe it's where you finally begin again. So before we step further into what happened next, let me ask you, have you ever found yourself giving everything you have only to be told you owed even more? If you have, I hope my journey can offer you not just understanding, but hope. Because sometimes losing your place at the table is the first step toward building a new one all your own. And sometimes, the most unexpected goodbyes lead us right back to ourselves. Looking back, it's easy to see the moment my heart tipped toward yes. It wasn't just the exhaustion in Brian's voice, or the way Samantha's messages always arrived late at night, asking if I might help with the twins in the morning. It was something deeper, the quiet ache of being needed again. My apartment was small, tucked above a bakery on Sycamore Street, and though it was mine, it was silent. I told myself I was content, but truthfully, the walls seemed to close in at night, whispering memories of when my life felt fuller, busier, brimming with purpose. So when Brian called, saying, "It's just temporary, Mom, a few months, I promise. We really need you," I didn't hesitate. I boxed up my wedding photos, my favorite cast iron pan, and the well-worn recipe binder I'd started the year Brian was born. I left behind a life I'd carefully built after losing my husband, trusting that in their home, I'd be building something new. I didn't think twice about how hard it might be to step into their routine, or how easy it was for my needs to fade into the background. The first few weeks I felt the warmth of being part of something bigger than myself. Each morning, I'd rise with the sun to make pancakes for Eli and Max, who argued over whether chocolate chips or blueberries were better. I'd fold tiny socks, scrub grass stains from soccer uniforms, and keep a steady supply of homemade snacks ready for afternoon meltdowns. Sometimes Samantha would wave from her laptop in the dining room, and Brian would squeeze my shoulder in thanks before heading out the door. Those small gestures meant everything, even if they didn't always notice how much I tried to smooth the rough edges of their days. But I'll be honest, there were moments I missed my own space. My little reading chair, the freedom to play music in the kitchen, or to sleep past 6 if I wanted. Sometimes I felt invisible, like the steady hum in the background of their busy lives. I remembered a friend once telling me, "The hardest part of growing older isn't being alone, it's being present and unnoticed." There's truth in that, and I wonder if others out there have felt it too. The ache of wanting to be useful, but not wanting to disappear. Still, I kept reminding myself of my purpose. Family, after all, is built on sacrifice and showing up even when it isn't easy. There are so many parents, especially in America, who give up their retirements, their savings, and sometimes even their homes to help the next generation get by. I'd read articles about grandparents who raised their grandkids or moved across states to lend a hand, hoping it would stitch the family closer together. Sometimes it worked. Other times, like my friend Lila, it left wounds that took years to heal. If there's a lesson hidden in those early days, it's this: love doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it's in the quiet ways we show up over breakfast tables, in the folding of laundry, in listening for a cry at midnight. But even the most willing heart needs boundaries, and I wish I'd understood that sooner. It's easy to believe that being needed is the same as being valued, but those two things are not always the same. As I settled into the rhythms of their house, I didn't see the cracks forming. I was too busy trying to fit in, too eager to help, to pause and ask myself if my place in their lives was truly secure, or if it was always meant to be temporary. But sometimes the things we don't notice become the ones that change everything. And in my case, I would soon learn that love, no matter how deeply given, cannot keep you in a place where you are only seen for what you provide. There's a quiet way that mothers and grandmothers slip into the fabric of a house. At first, I thought my place was certain. I set the breakfast table before dawn, tied Eli's shoes, and tamed Max's wild curls before school. I was the steady presence in the background, making sure no one ran out of clean socks or lunch money. Yet with each passing week, I felt myself blending into the wallpaper. The tasks were endless, but my voice, my ideas, even my laughter, seemed to echo a little softer, lost in the constant shuffle of their daily routines. One afternoon, while I was baking banana bread for the boys' class party, Samantha wandered in, phone pressed to her ear, barely noticing me dusting cinnamon across the top. She gave me a thumbs up, distracted, then left without another word. It wasn't unkind, just routine. Later that evening, Brian rushed through the door, a pile of bills in hand, muttering about payroll at the cafe. He paused, looked at the bread, smiled tiredly, and said, "Thanks, Mom," before disappearing into the office. In moments like that, I wondered if they even remembered how different life was before I moved in. I started to notice the small things. Family movie nights, where I was the one fetching popcorn, but no one saved me a spot on the couch. Dinner conversations that flowed around me, not through me. Sometimes when Samantha's friends came over, she'd introduce me simply as Brian's mom, never mentioning all the ways I tried to make their lives easier. It's a strange thing, feeling so necessary and so invisible all at once. I realized how easy it was to become part of the background, always needed, rarely acknowledged. I thought maybe it was just me, maybe I was too sensitive, or maybe this was simply what happened as families grew and changed. But then I remembered my friend Helen, who once moved in with her daughter's family in Ohio. She'd spent her days helping with the grandkids, cleaning, organizing, and cooking homemade lasagna every Sunday. Yet Helen confided in me that she felt more like a ghost than a guest, never quite belonging, always hovering on the edge of family life. Her words echoed in my mind, and I began to understand it wasn't just me. This silent slipping away happens in so many homes, often without anyone realizing it. If there's a lesson in those quiet days, it's that love given quietly is often overlooked. The people who make our lives comfortable are the ones we're most likely to take for granted. It's human nature, I suppose, to grow used to the gentle hands that keep things steady. But there's a cost to being invisible. Even if the world keeps spinning, your spirit can slowly fade. I wish looking back I'd spoken up sooner, shared my feelings, and reminded my family that I was more than the tasks I completed each day. Still, at the time, I kept going, telling myself that being needed was enough. I believed that if I just worked a little harder, or smiled a little brighter, maybe I'd be noticed. Maybe the love I gave would come back around. But sometimes, when you make yourself invisible for long enough, others forget how to see you. I didn't know it then, but my willingness to fade into the background was leading me to a crossroads I never saw coming. Soon, I'd be faced with a choice, one that would force me to decide whether love meant staying quiet or finally finding my own voice. The day the contract appeared, the air in the house felt colder, as if something essential had shifted beneath our feet. I was halfway up the stairs, arms full of folded towels, when Brian called me into the kitchen. He didn't meet my eyes. Beside him, Samantha stood with her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a line. On the table was a manila envelope, its contents fanned out in perfect order. I sat down, unsure if I was in trouble or about to be handed another shopping list. Brian slid the envelope toward me. "We need to talk, Mom," he said softly, and the words sent a chill down my spine. Inside, I found a neatly typed rental agreement, $750 a month for the basement due on the 1st. There were clauses about late fees, shared utilities, and even a polite line at the bottom about respecting quiet hours. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake, a document meant for someone else. But as Brian explained in careful, almost apologetic words that money was tight and the arrangement was only fair, I realized this was no error. Samantha chimed in, her voice sharper. "We have bills. Mortgage, groceries, daycare. You've lived here for free for a long time." I wanted to protest, to point out all the ways I'd contributed. I wanted to ask if casseroles, carpool pickups, and bedtime stories counted for nothing. But as I looked at their faces, I saw only exhaustion and calculation. It wasn't cruelty, I told myself, just practicality, the American way perhaps to turn even family into business when times get tough. I thought about stories I'd read about elderly parents across the country paying rent, or even being evicted by their own children. My friend Rose in Michigan had once confided in me about her daughter charging her for groceries and how it chipped away at her sense of belonging. Sitting there, my heart pounded, not with anger, but with a deep, unsteady grief. I tried to remember when love had turned into an equation and why I hadn't noticed sooner. If there's a lesson in that moment, it's that financial strain can distort even the closest bonds. Money has a way of putting price tags on things that were never meant to be sold. Families sometimes mistake fairness for coldness, not realizing the invisible cost. And when you're the one holding the invoice, you wonder if all you're giving was invisible too. I signed the paper with shaking hands, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to cause a scene. I told myself it was just a bump in the road, another sacrifice for family. But in truth, a small piece of me cracked that day. That night, as I lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of the house, I realized I was no longer a mother or grandmother. I was a tenant with a price tag. Sometimes life hands us moments that reveal the fragile lines between love and obligation. Mine had just arrived, crisp and unyielding. But as painful as it was, that contract became the first step toward a new kind of clarity. I began to see the cracks not just in my family, but in the way I'd allowed myself to accept less than I deserved. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to make a choice that would change everything, one that would remind me what it means to value myself, even when others forget. And sometimes, the only way forward is to let go of what no longer serves you and trust that something better lies ahead. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, I lay awake in the basement, staring at the ceiling and listening to the distant hum of the refrigerator. I replayed the conversation in my head, Brian's careful words, Samantha's firm tone, the weight of the contract in my hands. I wondered if there was anything I could have done differently. I had come here to help to bring comfort and warmth to a family that I thought needed me. Yet now, I was reduced to a number on a page. The ache of feeling more like a burden than a blessing kept me from sleep. Around midnight, I crept upstairs for a glass of water. Their voices drifted from the kitchen, soft but clear enough for me to hear. Samantha's words stung. "She won't pay. She doesn't have it." Brian replied, "Just give her the deadline. She'll leave eventually. I'm not running a charity." I stood frozen in the dark hallway, the cold tile beneath my feet, and felt my heart sink. There was no anger in their voices, only fatigue and resignation. In that moment, I understood just how far I had slipped from their hearts, how easy it was to become invisible. By dawn, my decision was made. I quietly packed a small suitcase, only what I could carry. A few shirts, my favorite cardigan, the recipe binder, and the photo of Brian as a little boy in his yellow raincoat. No notes, no accusations. I didn't want to plead for space in a home where I was no longer wanted. Instead, I left my key on the kitchen counter, wiped a single fingerprint from the fridge, and stepped out into the cool morning air. I walked to the nearest motel, the world feeling both too big and too empty for just one person. The room smelled faintly of bleach and tired dreams, with curtains that didn't quite close, and a lamp that flickered every time I tried to read. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle around me. 3 years I had given to that house, to the twins, to Brian and Samantha, to the rhythms of their lives. And yet in the end, not a single call or message arrived to check if I was safe. It made me think of other women I'd known, like my friend Helen, who moved out quietly after her son remarried, or Mrs. Lee down the street, who now lived in a senior apartment, her phone silent most days. There's a lesson tucked inside these moments of loss. It isn't weakness to walk away from a place where you are no longer cherished. Sometimes leaving is an act of quiet courage. I wished I had understood that earlier in life, that loving others doesn't mean shrinking yourself down or waiting for scraps of affection. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is honor your own worth, even if it means starting again alone. As I unpacked my things in that motel, I realized I wasn't just grieving the loss of a home, I was grieving the loss of the role I'd played for so long. But life has a way of offering us new chapters, even when we can't see the pages ahead. I didn't know it then, but something was waiting for me in the bottom of an old file folder, something that would change the way I saw myself and the story I thought had ended for good. On my 3rd morning at the motel, I found myself going through the small folder of documents I'd brought: birth certificate, nursing license, faded photos, and a few old letters. At first, it was simply something to do, a way to fill the emptiness of unfamiliar hours. I ran my fingers over a blue envelope, its handwriting instantly recognizable: Mrs. Florence Green. She was my last hospice patient, before I retired, a woman with sharp wit and a generous heart. I remembered sitting by her bedside, holding her hand as she told me, "You're more than a nurse, Evelyn. You're family to me." Those words meant the world, even if I'd tucked them away for years. Inside the envelope, I found a neatly folded letter and a sheaf of legal documents. My breath caught as I read the words, "Ownership transfer 51% of the very coffee shop Brian now ran." Memories came rushing back. Years ago, when Brian struggled to get his dream off the ground, I'd introduced him to Mrs. Green. She'd agreed to invest, but with a twist, she trusted me, not just him, and had put the business in my name. I'd nearly forgotten. It felt like a lifetime ago. Now, holding the papers, the truth of my own quiet power made my hands tremble. It was a strange, bittersweet revelation. For so long, I'd seen myself only as a helper in Brian's life, never realizing that I'd played a much bigger role behind the scenes. I thought of all the parents and grandparents who give and give, never expecting anything in return. Sometimes our contributions are invisible, even to ourselves. I remembered a story in the news about an older man in Nebraska who discovered after his daughter's divorce that he'd been the silent co-owner of her bakery, his investments finally recognized. That realization gave me hope. Perhaps our worth doesn't disappear, even when it goes unnoticed for years. There's a lesson here, I think, about the value we carry quietly. The things we do in love, offering comfort, lending money, introducing connections, may not be celebrated, but they matter. Sometimes we're more important to the story than anyone realizes. Finding those documents reminded me that self-worth isn't always reflected back by the people we love most. Sometimes it's hidden in the choices we made with open hearts, waiting for us to rediscover. I took the next step slowly. I called the lawyer whose name appeared on the transfer, seeking advice for the first time, not as Brian's mother, but as the rightful business owner. That small act, a phone call, was the start of reclaiming my place in the world, not just as a caregiver, but as someone with a voice and legal standing. As I looked out the motel window that afternoon, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time: quiet confidence. I was no longer lost. I was preparing to write a new chapter. Little did I know that rediscovered ownership would give me the leverage and the courage to face Brian and Samantha again, not as someone asking for acceptance, but as someone who had earned her place. And soon, I would have the chance to decide just what I wanted to do with that power and how to use it, not just for myself, but for others who'd felt invisible too. With those legal documents in hand, a new sense of agency settled over me, a quiet strength I hadn't felt since my nursing days. I spent the next morning in a corner of a bustling co-working space, surrounded by strangers tapping at laptops. My fingers trembled a little as I scanned the ownership papers and emailed them to a lawyer for review. The clerk smiled kindly when I asked how to print and fax the documents. For the first time in months, I introduced myself simply as Evelyn, not Brian's mom, and it felt like stepping out into sunlight after a long winter. Once my ownership was confirmed, I took careful steps. I called the property manager for the building where Brian's Café operated, inquiring quietly if it might be for sale. The answer came quickly: yes, and a cash offer would be considered. It struck me how business so impersonal and transactional could change the fate of a family in an instant. I remembered a story about a retired schoolteacher in Oregon who bought out her son's failing hardware store to save the family legacy, only to discover how tangled business and love can become. Part of me hesitated, worried about what taking action would mean. Was I being vindictive? Was I trying to teach a lesson, or simply taking back my dignity? The questions spun in my mind. But another part, steadier and wiser, knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about recognizing my own worth, something I'd forgotten in the years spent folding laundry and picking up toys. I realized there are moments in life when you must choose yourself, even if others won't understand. That's not selfishness, it's survival. Once the sale closed and I became the landlord, I instructed the property manager to raise the rent only modestly enough to signal that change had come. When Brian and Samantha received the new lease agreement, their reactions arrived like aftershocks. A text from Brian. "Are you behind this, Mom?" I didn't answer. Samantha called, her voice tight with confusion, but I let it ring. It's never easy to break an old pattern to stand up for yourself after years of saying yes. I thought of other women I'd known who found their voices only after losing nearly everything and felt proud to join their quiet company. There's a lesson in this strange turning point. Sometimes claiming your worth means risking misunderstanding or even anger. We're taught, especially as mothers, that love is endless patience, self-sacrifice, and putting others first. But true love, I believe, has room for boundaries and self-respect. Setting limits isn't an act of spite, it's a declaration that your value matters too. Even if it shakes the ground beneath a family's feet, the aftershocks can lead to stronger foundations if anyone is willing to rebuild. As I watched the drama unfold online, Samantha's video lamenting betrayal, the cafe's desperate sales promotions, and a growing wave of support from strangers, I realized I had finally stepped out of the shadows. I was no longer just the background character in someone else's life. For the first time in years, I was writing my own story. The next step, I knew, would be choosing what kind of future I wanted, not just for me, but for all those who still feel unseen. In the weeks that followed, the shockwaves of my decision rippled through our family and beyond. I watched from my new apartment above a flower shop smelling of fresh roses and coffee grounds as the cafe's social media filled with apologies, discount deals, and desperate attempts to win customers back. I saw Samantha post a teary video about family betrayal, painting herself and Brian as victims. The comments were a swirl of sympathy and suspicion. Strangers weighed in, some harsh, some kind, but many curious about what had really happened behind closed doors. It was strange watching my private pain become public theater. During those days, I realized how quickly stories spread and mutate online. I thought about Mrs. Simmons, a friend from my nursing days, whose family rift went viral after her daughter shared one side of a painful story on Facebook. The fallout left scars on both sides, trust lost, reputations bruised, and no easy way to repair the hurt. I wondered if my own family would be able to find their way through the noise and rumors, or if this was simply the cost of standing up for myself. Sometimes the truth has to survive a storm of misunderstanding before it can be seen clearly. One afternoon, after Samantha's video was posted, I finally decided to speak for myself. I set up my phone at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming over my shoulder, and shared my side not with anger, but with quiet certainty. I showed the documents, my investment in the cafe, my name on the deed, the history of how I'd helped Brian get started. I explained that this wasn't revenge, just a long overdue recognition of my role and my worth. I didn't ask for sympathy or applause. I simply wanted the truth to have a voice my own. What surprised me most was the response. Messages arrived from people I'd never met: women in Nebraska, grandfathers in Texas, caregivers from Florida, each with their own stories of feeling unseen, undervalued, or cast aside. They wrote about walking away from families who treated them as burdens, about finding new homes, new friendships, and new peace. Their courage gave me strength. It reminded me that I wasn't alone and that sometimes sharing our stories helps others find their voices too. If there's a lesson to be found here, it's that healing rarely happens in isolation. The road to self-respect is often rocky, with detours through guilt, grief, and misunderstanding. But each time we speak honestly, each time we refuse to let our worth be decided by someone else, we make that road a little smoother for the next person. Family conflict may go viral, but so can hope and resilience if we're willing to share it. With the dust slowly settling, I began to turn my attention toward what came next. I started volunteering at the local library, organizing children's story hours, and helping seniors learn to use email. I discovered joy in small acts of service this time, on my own terms, with no one expecting me to fade into the background. And as I made new connections, I began to imagine a future where my story and my heart were finally my own to nurture. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself growing into this quieter, more independent life. There was peace in the routine mornings spent browsing the market for fresh fruit, afternoons painting gentle waves from my porch, and evenings cooking meals, just for me, no one else's preferences to consider. At first, I worried that this solitude would feel like emptiness, but over time, it became a comfort. I learned to savor the freedom to appreciate the small joys of choosing for myself. The past, with all its hurt and noise, began to fade into something softer, like a memory glimpsed through morning mist. It wasn't all easy. Some days, a wave of loneliness would wash over me, especially on birthdays or holidays, when I thought of the twins' laughter or Brian's old jokes around the dinner table. But those moments reminded me that grief and gratitude can share the same space. I remembered Mrs. Lee, a neighbor from my old apartment, who once told me, "You can miss the life you had and still be grateful for the one you're building." I clung to those words, letting them anchor me through both the quiet and the ache. During this time, I used some of the proceeds from the cafe sale to quietly establish a small scholarship fund for women over 60 raising grandchildren on their own. I called it Second Bloom, never putting my name on the paperwork, but hoping it would help someone else find stability and hope. A local caseworker told me about a grandmother who, after losing her job, was able to keep her 2 granddaughters in school thanks to a similar fund. That story warmed my heart more than any public recognition could. What I've learned is that healing isn't about erasing the past or pretending that pain never happened. It's about allowing yourself to grow beyond it, to build something new out of the pieces. For me, that meant redefining what it meant to be useful, to be valuable. I didn't need to fold anyone's laundry or bake birthday cakes to prove my worth. I only needed to treat myself with the same care I'd once given everyone else. That's a lesson many people, especially women, take a lifetime to learn. As spring arrived in the little coastal town, I felt a gentle sense of renewal. The neighbors, once strangers, had become friendly faces in the market and at the library. I even began teaching a watercolor class on Saturday mornings, watching others find their own creative spark. In helping others start over, I found myself starting over too. Life, I realized, is full of unexpected second chances. All we have to do is be brave enough to accept them when they come. And so, as I closed the door on that long, complicated chapter, I found myself not waiting for apologies or reconnections, but embracing the life I'd chosen. I was ready at last for the peace and possibility of what came next. Looking back on this journey, I see a tapestry woven from both heartbreak and hope. I left behind a home where love was measured by chores and monthly payments, and learned, sometimes painfully, that being needed is not the same as being valued. I discovered that boundaries, though difficult to set, are not walls, they are bridges to self-respect. In stepping away from the shadows of invisibility, I found my voice again, not in confrontation, but in quiet acts of courage and compassion, both for myself and for others who have traveled this lonely road. The little moments stand out now more than ever. The laughter of new friends at the market, the gentle discipline of learning to rest when I'm tired, and the soft pride that comes from giving without losing myself in the process. I think of the women and men who wrote to me after I shared my story, each one holding their own patch of hurt, each one brave enough to begin again. We are all, in our own ways, building tables where we finally have a seat, learning to celebrate ourselves, even if those we love cannot always join us. If you've found echoes of your own story in mine, I hope you carry away this: Your worth isn't defined by the roles you play in someone else's life. Whether you are a parent, a partner, or a friend, you deserve to be seen, heard, and cherished for who you are. Healing begins when we honor that truth, when we choose peace over resentment, and when we reach out to help others heal too. Life is full of second chances, even if they look nothing like the dreams we once had. So as this chapter closes and a new one opens, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. What boundaries do you need to set? Where could you offer yourself more kindness? And who in your life might be waiting for a gentle reminder that they matter too? Let's keep this conversation going. Share your story in the comments below. Tell us about your own second bloom or the moment you realized you deserved more. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real-life journeys of hope, healing, and self-discovery. Your voice matters here. Every comment, every share, is a chance to help someone else feel a little less alone. Thank you for being part of this community together. We can turn quiet courage into a chorus of hope for all who need it.